Welcome to today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about how you can take control of your data in the age of AI. My name's Ben Jarvis and I'm CTO at Adatis, which is the data and AI practice of Telefonica Tech. So today I'll be joined by Gunter Richter, who's our head of business consulting, and Hingy Lee, who is one of our solution architects. So in terms of the agenda for today's session, I'll kick off with a quick introduction to what AI is and also some of the governance and security concerns that we're seeing around the adoption of AI. I'll then hand over to Hingy to talk about Microsoft Copilot and how we can apply security to AI that's used in a software as a service setting. And then I'll hand over to Gunter to talk through how we can use Microsoft Purview to secure bespoke AI use cases that are using more structured data. Then we'll talk through next steps and we'll have some time at the end for questions. So feel free to add those to the chat as we go through. So just to start, most people have probably seen some of the hype around AI for the last couple of years or so. And that really started since the release of ChatGPT, where tools such as AI were kind of brought into the hands of the general public. And people who weren't necessarily technical could start to see some of the benefits of using those tools. And off the back of that, there was lots of hype. So we saw articles like this where people were saying that people were going to lose their jobs and AI was going to replace them. Or one example that's quite extreme is people have now changed to walking dogs and fixing air conditioners because their whole industry has been replaced by AI. So there's been lots of hype around it and lots of kind of misinformation out there. But in reality, there's lots of different use cases where AI can help us in an enterprise setting. So the first is content generation. So that's where we want to take some kind of input and generate some content from it. So this could be writing an email from a brief summary or even generating a whole document. The next is content summarization and search. So if we have lots of textual data, we can ask an AI model to summarize that data for us. And we can use those models to ask questions about some of that data and provide us with a response. So let's say we've got hundreds of PDFs that have lots of really technical content in them. We can ask a tool like ChatGPT or Copilot a question, and it will search those documents for us and summarize the content to give us a relevant response. The next is pattern recognition. So AI models can take data from various different sources and identify patterns in the data that might not necessarily be visible to us. So one example could be, say we've got a list of customers with various attributes about them, and we might have some duplicate rows in there. We could pass that data to an AI model and it will identify which rows are similar for us and potentially recognize patterns in the data that are really difficult for us to code for. So it's able to recognize those patterns for us and understand which data is similar and find things that we might not necessarily recognize ourselves as humans. The next is code generation. So we can use AI models to take an input and generate some code for us. So as an example, we could be taking a question like, how many customers do we have in the UK? And using that to generate a query against the database to give us an answer. So it's converting that natural language into some code for us. Then we've got companion working. So that's where we can use AI models as either a pair programmer or a colleague to help explain concepts to us, troubleshoot issues, or teach us something new. So for the developers here, there's tools such as GitHub Copilot, which I've been using myself recently, and that really helps to increase productivity. So say you've got a random error in your code, you could ask Copilot to help you debug it and explain what the error means. So that saves us Googling or asking a colleague for help. And then the final group of use cases is prediction. So we can pass lots of disparate information into an AI model and ask it to make predictions for us. So let's say we give the model a company financial report and some structured data about the company's financial performance. We could ask the model to predict what the ongoing performance of the company is going to be based on the mix of structured and unstructured data. So that's something that would have been really difficult to do previously. And as I was saying, there's been lots of hype around AI and lots of news articles and use cases out there that are really overinflating the expectations around what it can do. I think we're really getting to the point now where we've hit the peak of that hype curve, and we're now starting to kind of realize some of the practicalities of what we need to do to adopt AI in a sustainable way. And we're starting to lower some of those expectations and get to the point where we can build out production solutions and start to get the right groundwork in place so that we can actually be productive using some of these new tools. And really, in terms of that adoption, there's 4 key areas that I see as being blockers as we're talking to customers. So the first one is choice. So looking at whether you should build or buy. So there's tools like Copilot out there that can give you a software as a service offering that's ready to go, or we can build solutions ourselves using custom code. So we've got lots of choice around how we do that, which tools we use, which models we use. And there's lots of worries there around whether your solution will be out of date before we actually go to productionize it. And we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves against technology and vendor changes as we're building out those solutions. The next is control, so understanding what data is being used where and understanding who has access to that data. And also looking at whether the data is of good enough quality and actually reflects the data as it is now. So we can make sure that the responses that we're getting from the models are accurate and are reflective of the data in its current state. Then there's compliance, so making sure that we're compliant with rules such as GDPR, ISO, and various other standards. And also making sure we've got the right level of auditing in place so we can understand what's going into the models and what responses are coming out and understand how they're being used, as well as starting to protect ourselves against the risk and liability that comes with using these models. So making sure that we're in compliance with the law and making sure that we're delivering things to a standard and being responsible with how we're using AI models. Then there's the cost, so understanding how much these models are going to cost and understanding whether we're actually going to get the return on the investment from them without incurring massive costs. And then in addition to that, looking at how we can optimize those costs over time and reduce them to the lowest possible level. So today's session will focus on the control and compliance side of things. So in terms of that, with some of the models that have come about now, we're starting to, the governance landscape around data is changing. So previously we were very focused on the structured aspects of data. So we might have things like transactional data coming from our various systems. We might have tables and things like our data warehouse, and we might have things like reports and dashboards that are giving us a view of that structured data. But now we're using tools such as Copilot and aspects of generative AI. We need to make sure that we're considering the unstructured data. So obviously, as part of that, we're bringing in things like documents, which are very unstructured and have got lots of textual data that we need to understand how that's put together and how it should be classified. And then we might even have things like chat messages if you're looking at Copilot. So we need to make sure that data is governed in the right way and make sure we've got the right controls in place to govern it for the various tools, whether they're Copilots in the sort of SaaS world or whether they're custom developed applications that we're building. And with that, we need to make sure that we're considering legal compliance with rules such as GDPR, make sure we're considering security, so ensuring we've got the right access control in place, ensuring that we're considering data privacy as we're building out these models and not exposing data that we shouldn't be. And then also considering lineage, so making sure we understand what data is being used where and understand exactly what use cases that data is being used for. So to do that, we need to have a governance layer in place, and that's really where Purview comes in. So that will be the tool that we're discussing today in the sessions from Hingy and Gunther. So I'll pass over to Hingy now to talk about the unstructured side of data protection.
Thank you, Ben. I'll just share my screen. Right, hope everyone can see the slideshow. It's on there. Can I just also ask if any of you have any questions? You can enter them into the GoToWebinar question thing where the question mark is. We'll tend to answer them at the end, but if there's anything relevant, one of my colleagues might call it out and we'll answer as we go, but we'll give time to answer questions at the end. So I'm now going to talk about how you can secure your data in Microsoft 365 when you're using Copilot. And as Ben says, this is mostly about Purview, but I'll go a bit into data governance in general inside Microsoft 365. So a lot of people want to know, if you're using Copilot, am I exposing myself? So the question is, what can Copilot access? Well, it's anything you can access. And the reason that is because it acts in your user context. So what Copilot can access is your SharePoint. So anything in the SharePoint repositories that you personally have access to using the user account that you normally use. Your OneDrive for Business. So note business, we're not talking about personal OneDrive. Everything here we're talking about your Microsoft 365 tenant. So your OneDrive for Business, anyone else's files or folders on OneDrive that they've shared explicitly with you. Anything else that's in Microsoft Graph. So Microsoft Graph is the API that connects all your data and the logic about how you interact with people. And this forms what's almost like a spider diagram of all the information that you do use on a day-to-day basis in Microsoft 365, or that you, with the permissions that you have access to. So the other thing is that there can be third-party data that is brought into Microsoft Graph, and Copilot will be able to access that as well, as long as you have access. And then you might have configured a plugin to something such as Jira or ServiceNow, and Copilot will have access to that as well, as long as you brought it into the Microsoft Graph. So we want to secure this, and there's a very well-recognized method of securing it that Microsoft called the Zero Trust Principles, which I'll go to briefly here. So the Zero Trust Principles are 7 layers of protection, and the first thing you normally start with is data protection. So by data protection, we're talking here about data loss prevention, Microsoft Purview information protection. So anything that's classified, confidential, has got personally identifiable information, you need to identify that information, label it, and put the relevant controls in place. Next thing, there's no point strengthening your data if anyone can access the data as you. So we do need to have things such as multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and the basics of having good passwords and locking your device and so on. So your identity cannot be used by someone else. So the next thing, app protection. If we talk about mobile phones, anyone can work on a smartphone nowadays. If you have corporate data on your company phone through Microsoft 365, or maybe it's Outlook, maybe it's Teams, you do need to protect that so people aren't using your corporate data and accidentally pasting it into something else such as Facebook or web browser because it just happens to be in the clipboard. So we can protect that using managed apps inside Intune, or there's other methods for doing so. While we're talking about the devices in Intune, you need to protect your device. So your device needs to be compliant, have security on it, have encryption, you need to be able to centrally manage it, but also being able to have a standard set of apps on your device goes a long way to having a compliant and protected device estate. So the next thing is threat protection. So this is quite a big topic, really, threat protection, and we're going from normal antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spam, anti-phishing. There's a whole range of products that you can use to protect from threats. And by threats, I do mean bad actors who are trying to get hold of your information, who are trying to act on your behalf, steal money, steal data, etc. And then secure collaboration for Teams. Basically, what I mean here is that if you're using Teams and then you want to share data with other people, there are several options for what sort of permissions that has, whether people who have the link can use it or anyone in your organization. What they can do with that has to be controlled. And the next thing is user permissions for data. So you can restrict the data that you've got using the tools I've already mentioned, but you can have SharePoint Advanced Management, and you can use groups, and it's like people using NTFS permissions in the past, but it's much more granular way of securing your data. So I'm going to concentrate on Purview because that's what we're going to talk about here. But just remember that these zero trust principles, they're small pieces of work that together they deliver you compliance, protection, and secure your data. So even if you haven't got time to do the whole lot in one go, Microsoft recommend you basically start with these things in this order. And by the time you've done the project, you'll have secured your data, reduced that attack surface. So let's go on to Purview. So Purview information protection, it's a way of classifying your data. And once we've classified your data, we can apply labels to it, and then we can apply policies to the data to prevent sharing it with people who shouldn't share it, people who might be able to view the data but not print it or forward it on. This is all done inside Microsoft Purview Information Protection. And one thing to point out really is that we're talking about Copilot and how to protect your data is inside Copilot. The tools to protect it are no different from the tools that you have if you didn't have Copilot or the tools that were available last year. It's the same suite of tools for data security. So let's look at how we use Purview Information Protection. So we're going to configure labels first. This is the normal journey for how you do Purview. I'm not going to do a live demo here of Purview because if any of you already use it, you'll know that navigating through the console is quite easy, but when you press things, there's some quite long delays before you can actually use the controls that you put in place. So first I'll show you what you do when you configure a label. So this is the Microsoft Purview console or the Purview portal, and where we go into classifiers, that's when we can have information types, and that's where the labels get created. We're going to talk about something called Project Obsidian here. It's anything that if you've been watching some of the Microsoft presentations about Copilot, this is something they've chosen just because Obsidian is a term that most of us don't have in our day-to-day data. So it's quite easy to detect for purposes of a demo. So here is standard labels, but there's one near the bottom above highly confidential, which is Project Obsidian, and that's the one that you'll see what happens when we start using the data inside SharePoint and also inside Copilot. So next, just showing you that the thing that we're going to do with this label is that we're going to apply some permissions to it, and there's going to be a group. If you're not a member of the group, you won't have any permissions to use it. So very, very powerful. This is before we even do anything like people can't save it, people can't print it, people can't forward it on. This is blanket. If you're not a member of the group, you cannot see the data at all. So I'm not showing you the actual sensitive information type about how it's detected, but behind here we were actually going to just look for the term Obsidian, and this is what it looks like once you've defined it. And when it matches this term, it finds the word Obsidian in the data anywhere, it will automatically apply this label. And so here's summary for the Project Obsidian label. So we're going to go and see what happens when someone who has access to it uses this, and that person is Alex. So here's Alex. He's happily looking at his data here, and any of you who were looking at what was going on before, you probably see that there was either an AW or an MA account that was doing it. MA is the administrator in most of the Microsoft demo tenants, and AW is Alex, who is the guy who owns this project. So this is SharePoint. This is the Project Obsidian folder, and it's also a Microsoft Teams team. And at the top, it says private group confidential Project Obsidian. So this SharePoint site is labeled, and Alex has got permission, so he can access this. So note the documents that are inside there. There is one document that doesn't have the sensitivity of confidential Project Obsidian, and that's because it's a Project Osiris document, so it's nothing to do with Obsidian. The label's not attached, even though it's inside this site. So what that really means is that someone can forward this to somebody else who's not a member of Project Obsidian. They will be able to read that document, but they wouldn't be able to get into the SharePoint site itself to find it. That's quite crucial when it comes to using Copilot, because the thing about Copilot is that it can't access anything you don't have access to, so it wouldn't be able to find this file. So here's a Word document that's been opened by Alex, and this is standard Purview labeling. At the top, there's a banner, Confidential Project Obsidian. It's written right across the top in blue as well, so this is a Project Obsidian document. So in Copilot, so this is M365 chat, which is the Copilot chat, Copilot for Microsoft 365. And Alex has asked, what are the important documents for Project Obsidian? Straight away, Copilot finds the documents, gives a short description to it, and also at the bottom, these are the references, and each of the references is the document. You can actually click on this and access the documents this way. And please remember, this is because Alex is a member of that group and he can view these documents. So here we're going to show you what happens when you use Copilot to start asking questions about documents. And the behavior to note is things such as that little shield that you can see on the screen there, the bit at the top where it's got Word, it's got the blue shield, says General. This is where you see things change based on whether labels are there or not, because I want to demonstrate to you that Copilot will create content and it will respect the labeling that's there, but also any content it creates will then inherit the same labels. So first things first, Alex is going to ask Copilot to draft a document, and he's going to use an existing file. So / name of file. These files have to be inside Microsoft 365, they have to be shared, and they have to have been indexed. If you create a file straight away, you won't see it in here. So it's found out that this file has got a sensitive information type, and hence the orange shield that's there. But once you generate the document, once Copilot starts generating this, something else will happen. So note at the top, there is a label here, General, All Employees, Unrestricted. It's not Project Obsidian at this moment, but this Word document now finds a different label, Confidential Anyone Unrestricted, because it's a DG2000 document. So something slightly different will happen if it was Project Obsidian, because it'll find Obsidian. So the bit at the top says Anyone Unrestricted, it will say Confidential Project Obsidian. So just remember that Copilot will respect the labeling that's there, and any content it creates will then inherit the labeling as well. So once you've done that, you can press keep it, you can keep that document, you can change it, but you've created a document quite quickly based on an existing file. So what happens if it's Project Obsidian then? So I'm going to write a short FAQ on Project Obsidian. This time at the top says Confidential Project Obsidian. So again, it's inherited the labeling, and then the document it creates has the same labeling applied because it contains that data. But note, it is Project Obsidian this time. It hasn't just applied any generic label. It's respected the fact that we detect that word Obsidian. So next thing, I'm going to show you what happens when Diego tries to do similar things. First things first, Diego goes to the SharePoint site. He doesn't have access. He can have access. If Alex wants him to be on his team, he can give access in the normal way. This is not a Copilot window. This is just standard Microsoft 365. You don't have access window. And once you have Copilot, it doesn't change the behavior of this sort of window. What it does change, though, is that he's asking Copilot chat, what is Project Obsidian? Because he heard Alex talking to Emily about it. And it says, I can't find it. So this is the expected behavior when you ask for something that you don't have access to. Copilot is acting in the context of Diego. Diego doesn't have access to any of the Project Obsidian files. So as a result of that, Copilot can't find anything. So if it actually said you have access, you don't have access, but files exist, that would not be good behavior. So this is what you would expect. So in summary, Microsoft 365 has got very, very good protection in there. Some of you are probably already using it. Some of you are probably wanting to implement some of the extra controls such as data loss prevention or Purview, but Copilot will respect all these policies, all the controls and so on. And any data protection you have in place, as you start your Copilot journey, it will start using all the good work that you've done to protect your data. So I'm going to hand over to Gunter now, who's going to talk about structured data and different types of AI tools.
Great, thank you, Hingy. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon to talk about AI and how we can govern our data relating to AI. So I'll share my screen. And you should all be able to see that. Hingy, Ben, just shout if you can't see that.
It's good.
All right, perfect. Right, so Hingy's taken us through some really good examples of AI in use, specifically Copilot. But we see out in the wild and with many of our customers so many more AI opportunities over and above things like Copilots and just plain ChatGPT that many of us use on a day-to-day basis. And to understand these in a little more detail, we tend to classify AI solutions into two key categories. And the first one we call non-differentiating AI. And these are things like the Copilot we spoke about, or that Hingy's been demonstrating, ChatGPT. And the reason why these are non-differentiating is because everyone, broadly everyone, has access to the same set of tools. And other than some of the specifics around the data that you may hold in terms of your office documents and all those sorts of things, the technology doesn't give you a significant advantage over someone else using the technology, just given that these are typically off-the-shelf type of AI solutions. Now, the broader opportunity we think lies in what we call the differentiating AI solutions. And you'll see there is an element of generative AI involved in terms of copilots, and that could be Copilot in GitHub, for example, helping you craft some code. But more specifically, if we look at the sort of middle bit and the bit to the right around the Azure AI services and machine learning options on Azure, these really open up the opportunities by using your own data for very specific use cases or to answer very specific questions, address very specific opportunities, or in fact unlock or address some specific challenges. And it's these sorts of bits that I want to talk about, governing the data and managing the data that underlies these AI solutions. Typically structured data, and I suppose just to be clear, when we talk about structured data, we mean specifically things like Azure SQL databases, Oracle databases, Postgres, even on-prem SQL, but also data that lives in your data lake storage. So things like Parquet files, CSV files, Excel documents, and those sorts of things. Right, so in terms of thinking about those sorts of differentiating AI opportunities or solutions, what we've recognized, and I hope everyone else does, is that in order to build a really good AI solution or a model or whatever it is you're building, you need good data. The old adage is garbage in, garbage out, and it's extremely true when you start thinking about these sorts of AI solutions and models that you might want to be building. So how do we go about ensuring that we use great data to build great AI outcomes? Well, first is starting with a compelling use case. One of my favorite movies is a film called The Big Blue, came out many years ago. And there's a scene in the movie where one of the characters says to the other one, "What is it that you want to know?" And the other character says, "Everything." So the first character asks him, "Everything about what?" And the reply is, "Everything about everything." And you can see that's not a question that can be answered. So the same is true when you're thinking about building AI solutions. What is that compelling use case that you want to build out? What is the business value? What is the business question you're trying to answer? Or what is the opportunity that you're going to unlock? And once you've answered that first bit, it's then about understanding and finding the contextual data that you'll need to build out that solution. And of course, in addition to the data being contextual, it needs to be of high quality, and very importantly, it needs to be trusted data. So if someone in an organization, a set of stakeholders, don't trust the underlying data, by inference, they won't trust the outputs that are going to be generated from that AI model or that AI solution that is being built. And it's this sort of second point here that we're going to be talking a little bit about in the next few slides. And of course, once you get these two bits right, it's then giving you that ability to differentiate your AI solutions to really drive those business outcomes. So the key takeaway here really is that great AI needs great data. So what do we need to do in order to understand or to make sure that our data is great or trusted or contextual? So there's 7 key questions, I suppose, that we need to ask of our data. And the first is why? Why do we have this data? What is the business context of the data? And why do we keep it? Because if there isn't any business context, it's probably not going to be valuable. Next, we need to understand where this data is stored. So once you've, as I said, once you've gotten that use case, that business use case, you've determined what data it is you need, where is that data to be found? And given the complexity and breadth of our data estates nowadays, this can be a very challenging question to answer. Next, we want to be able to describe the data. What does it look like? So we might have a data set. What does that schema look like? How is it described? And also, what is some of the context around the technical elements of that data in terms of business context, for example? Next, we need to understand how this data is stored. As I said, I mentioned a few examples of sort of structured data sources, but it's important to know how the data is stored in order to determine how we're going to use it to drive, train, feed our models or build our solution around. Next, we need to know when this data was created, also how long it should be kept for. I think Ben mentioned in one of his opening slides, you know, the data, if we don't know how recent the data is, we're not going to have a level of trust that we should have in it. So how recent is that data? When was it created? When was it updated? And is there a point in time when we need to get rid of it? Next, we need to know who created the data and who's responsible for maintaining it, especially if we want to answer some of these questions or in fact ask contextual questions of the data in that, what does it represent? How can we use it? What should we be doing with it? What shouldn't we be doing with it, etc. And then finally, how much of the data is there? So if you're wanting to build out a model where you're looking for a statistically significant amount of data and you've only got 100 records, you're probably looking in the wrong place. So it's important to know the sort of depth of that data. Now, answering these 7 questions might seem simple, but is often complex. And this is where we start using some tooling, and in this case, Microsoft Purview. As Hingy spoke about Purview for unstructured data, we're looking more at the structured side of things. And you'll see on the bottom row are the sorts of features available in Purview that can help you answer these 7 questions of your data. And they are things like a data catalog, metadata tagging, data lineage, data definitions, all of these sorts of things. And I'll speak a little bit about those in the coming slides. So broadly, we're talking about Microsoft's unified data governance platform. It can be a bit confusing the way that Purview is being used for multiple products. But the way that the product set is moving is to this unified place. I guess I can't see any of the sort of chat or the question windows now, but if you have used Purview at all for structured data, please just pop a comment in one of the questions and say how long ago you used it. It'll just help us understand your experience of Purview, because it has come along in leaps and bounds since its release a few years ago. But as I say, we're going to be focusing on the structured side of Purview right now. So really, what does it look like when you deploy Purview onto your data estate? There's 4, I suppose, key features that I've called out here. And these are things that are going to be really helpful to understand our data in more depth. And as I say, answer those 7 questions and ensure that we are using high quality contextual data to drive our AI solutions. So first on the left, we've got the data map. And this is essentially a way to logically understand your data estate. You can customize the way you structure your data map. Often it's done by functional business area. It might be done by environment, so dev, prod, test, that sort of thing. It might be done by line of business system. But it's a way for you to logically create the map of your data. And also, very importantly, it allows you to overlay a security model on your metadata. So whilst a person might not physically have access to the actual data in a SQL database, for example, you may want to restrict them viewing the metadata. Although it's low risk, it might be something that you want to do. And the data map is the way that you do that. And it's also the way that you really start off using Purview by structuring that view of your landscape. Next, we have the data catalog. And this is what Purview goes away and does for you. So once you've connected or registered your data sources, the Purview will then go away and scan those data sources. It'll automatically create the metadata. And what it'll do is also apply classifications. So you can use sensitivity labels that he spoke about. It'll pull those across from the other side of Purview and apply those to your data sets. But it'll also classify things like personal information, be it ethnicity, gender, email address, telephone number, all of these sorts of things. So it gives you the ability to really classify your data, but also more importantly to search your data. The search is very powerful. So when you're starting to explore your data, either for a typical reporting and analytics type use case, or more specifically to build out AI, and you want to search for customer data, for example, a search of customer is going to bring back all of the tables that are named customer or contain customer data or have a column called customer. And of course, you can then filter that by the sensitivity labels, your different types of data sources. So it gives you a really quick way to explore your data estate and understand where that data is and how relevant it might be to your use case. The next is our data estate health management. And what this does is it allows generally data governance professionals to understand how well their data is curated. It allows them to understand where certain risks might be. For example, if data is not well described, it's not classified, it doesn't have an owner. It's really a good tool to understand how healthy that data estate is, both from a data point of view and from a metadata point of view. And then finally, there's the data quality aspect, which is one of the newer features of structured data Purview. And this is really powerful in that it allows you to create rules. It has some out-of-the-box rules, but you can also create your own around completeness, checking for data types, checking for empty records. There's a whole lot of rules you can build. And what it'll do is it'll overlay that on the data set and allow you to understand at a glance what that data quality is, dependent on the rules that you've designed. And highlight those so you can understand how trustworthy your data is, what the level of quality is, and how comfortable you can be using it as a basis for one of your AI solutions. I think one of the things to also consider, and it's beyond the scope of this this webinar, is the obviously ethical aspect. Whilst we can think about the regulatory aspect in terms of highlighting certain markers on the data to say, you know, it shouldn't be used because it contains special category data, for example, perhaps like political or religious affiliation, that can be called out. But one of the things that needs to be considered is then the ethical aspect of what you're doing to build your AI models, and more specifically, how you're going to bring those to life. So, for example, you might want to build out a model that predicts student churn in a higher education institute, be it a college or a university, and you would use data sources such as exam results, class attendance, survey feedbacks, engagement surveys, those sorts of things, to be able to spot when a student might churn or drop out of the higher education program unexpectedly or early, which is all good, until you go and have a conversation with that student and it seems a bit creepy. And so those are the sort of questions you'll also have to ask, and that tools like this won't necessarily answer for you. It's all about applying judgment. Obviously still working within the rules and regulations, but always asking yourself, if I were in that position, would this thing feel creepy? And if it does feel creepy, it's probably not a good thing to build a model on, or to build a model to answer to or for. Right, so that's a very brief description of Microsoft Purview for structured data. I will now, sorry, stole some of your thunder there, Ben. I will hand back to Ben to talk about some next steps and also to handle the Q&A session.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Gunther. I will share my screen again. Once the technology works.
I'll stop sharing. That might help.
Brilliant. So yeah, I hope today's session was useful for everybody. In terms of next steps, feel free to get in contact with us. We've got a few different offerings that are available for people that are interested in AI. So we've got one that's an AI briefing. So that's around giving you an idea of some of the different technologies that are out there and starting to look at how they can impact your business and what areas AI could potentially be deployed in. We've then got our AI readiness kickstart. So the idea of that is for us to come in and look at the different areas of your business, talk to different people and understand some of those key processes that have the ability to be improved using AI. And then from that, we can start to look at generating a roadmap of potential use cases that have the highest impact and start coming up with a plan of how to implement those use cases and how to go about productionizing them. And then finally, we've got our data governance kickstart, quick start, which is geared towards getting Purview deployed and getting that into your environment and starting to catalog your data assets and beginning to build out some of the elements that Hingy and Gunther have talked about today. So yeah, I hope today's session was useful. I see we've got a couple of questions in the comments. So the first one is, I'd be keen to understand how you work with public sector organizations who are not sure if they need Copilot, AI, ChatGPT, or Azure OpenAI service. All similar, what can you offer in a pre-sales capacity? So yeah, that's really where the AI briefings that we can offer and also the AI readiness engagements come in. So during pre-sales, we can start to work with you and understand what the potential use cases are for you within AI and start to understand which technology would be best suited to those use cases. So whether that's going with something that's off the shelf like Copilot, or whether there's benefits in using some of the more custom technology such as the OpenAI service to build out those differentiating AI use cases. So yeah, if you get in contact with us, then we're happy to have a chat and talk about what some of those use cases can be and how the different solutions can fit in. We've also got a question around Copilot. So the first one was, is there a way to see what data Copilot has access to?
Will I take that one?
Pick that one up.
Yeah, the main thing about Copilot, if we're talking about Copilot for Microsoft 365, is that I said that it uses Graph. So if you want to see what access Microsoft has in terms of Graph, you can go to something called Graph Explorer. So if you put Graph Explorer or Microsoft Graph Explorer into your favorite search engine, or even into the Copilot chat, it will bring up the thing called the Graph Explorer. It's a development tool, and it can either act as a demo to show you what happens in a demo tenant, or if you actually put your credentials in there, it will actually act as you and show you everything it can access in terms of Microsoft Graph. It will bring up things like your photograph that you have in the top corner on Teams. It'll bring up your emails, it'll bring up other data. It is a developer tool. It isn't the easiest thing to use, but you can uncover absolutely everything that Copilot can uncover.
Cool.
I hope that's the question.
Yeah, just following on from that, the next question around Copilot is, where is Copilot processing the data? Is it actually on your PC, or is that processing done in the cloud?
Do you want me to do that one as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are actually two answers to this question. And at the start of the year, the answer would have just been in the Azure data center. Please be aware that it is segregated. There's physical and logical security to make sure that your data is actually just inside your tenant, but the actual compute is in the Azure data center. This changed when Microsoft launched the Copilot Plus PCs. They've got something called an NPU, or a neural processing unit, and that can offload some of the tasks. In the same way that people have been using, say, NVIDIA GPUs to do some AI functions, Copilot can use the NPU on your Surface Laptop 11 or Surface Pro 11 or Surface Laptop 7 or any of the other devices that have got the Copilot Plus designation on them.
Okay, brilliant. And then I think we've got a couple for Gunter. So the first one is, how mature are the data quality features of structured data in Purview?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good question. It is one of the newer features of Purview. I think I was quite surprised when we started using it because it was more mature than I expected. So it's got a lot of default functionality in terms of the sorts of default quality rules that it'll apply to a data set. It does then allow customization of those or the addition of rules. It allows you also to create some logic within those rules. So it's as a sort of V1, I think it's pretty good. There are some limitations in terms of the data sources that it can apply the quality rules to, and that's generally limited to, I think it's data lake storage and I think it's Azure SQL. So it certainly won't allow you to apply those sorts of data quality rules to on-prem stuff. I imagine that Microsoft will continue to develop with a sort of cloud-first approach anyway, covering off the Azure type data sources first. But yeah, I think for a first foray into data quality, it's pretty decent.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's been a long time coming. It's definitely a feature we've all been asking for a long time. So it's great that it's there, even if it is in basic form.
It is. It's a very welcome addition to the platform.
Cool. And then we had another question around Purview, which was, what are some of the other use cases for structured data in Purview?
Okay, so there's, I suppose, first and foremost is the data governance view of the world, and that is first and foremost curation of your data estate and through the management of its metadata. So understanding, as I spoke through the examples there, what data we have, where it is, what it looks like, who should be owning it, who owns it, how is it described, all of those sorts of things. There is then also the reporting and analysis view of the world. So it's a good tool to allow users to find Power BI reports. So if you cataloged your Power BI tenant, it's very easy to search and find those reports rather than making your way through multiple workspaces, for example, or folder structures, or trying to understand what app it's in. It's very searchable, and it also has the ability to mark an asset as promoted. So, for instance, if there are 10 reports that might do the same thing or a similar thing, and the developer of that report has promoted one or certified it, actually that's a better word, it'll surface to the top of the search results. And then it also allows users to explore the lineage from Power BI so they can understand where that data is coming from. It allows them to see who else is using that report so they can contact them for additional, I suppose, insights. And if you do have the rights in place to use that report, you can launch it into Power BI or Fabric from the Purview portal. If you're a report developer, in a similar vein, it can allow you to quickly explore the data to find the data you need to write a report. So that's probably the second use case, and I suppose the AI use case is a culmination of those two in terms of exploring the data and understanding what you have and how it's made up.
Cool, brilliant. I think there's also the AI Hub features that they've announced in Purview recently, which let you look at the usage of things like Copilot, but also the OpenAI service across the organization and start to look at how those tools are being used and also to flag up any malicious use of those tools. So yeah, I think Purview as a whole is really useful for getting that view across the organization of what data is being used where.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's also some of the reporting and insights available in Purview is the catalog adoption set of reports. So you can see what people are searching for. You can see of those assets they're searching for, how well curated they are. So you can highlight areas of risk. So where, for instance, someone's searching for a particular term or there's a high search volume and the curation level of that asset is very low, you can see that's a risk because it's obviously important data, but we don't know a lot about it. And then you can also see what people are searching for but not finding. So again, that's a bit of a flag to say, well, people think there's some data out there, but it's not catalogued. We don't know about it. So we can start actioning that and then try and understand what it is that we don't have as part of our catalog.
Yeah, definitely. That's really useful. So I think that's all we've got in terms of questions. So yeah, thank you to everyone for joining. And as we said, feel free to reach out if you've got any questions or would like any further information or would like a demo of some of the tools that we've talked through today. But yeah, thanks for spending the time with us, and I hope that session was useful to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.